Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Hello. Hello, friends, colleagues, students. I'm Dr. Michael Tomko. I'm the chair of the Humanities Department here, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Fall 2025 Fall Humanities Lecture. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Anna Moreland, to introduce our speaker, Mr. David Brooks. Before that, I want to say a few thank yous. So first of all, thank you to the law school for hosting us today, to the Eleanor H. McCullen Center for co-hosting and co-sponsoring this event, as well as to the honors program for co-hosting and sponsoring the event. And to the team from the honors program, the Department of Humanities, and the law school, and especially the law school events team who have helped put everything together. A real remarkable group to bring us all together here. I especially need to acknowledge the grant that we've received from Wake Forest and the Lilly Endowment to sponsor us tonight. And I need to remark that any of the opinions expressed by our participants tonight, including yourselves, are strictly yours and don't necessarily reflect that of Wake Forest if you were worried about doing so. And I also want to also just say a few ground rules. We come together every year for this lecture, and it's always a wonderful event, very convivial event. And what makes it so is the way we treat guests here at Villanova, right? The ideals of hospitality and conviviality and patience with one another are a big part of that. So I want to remind everyone the event's going to run from 7 to 8:30, and we will have a hard stop at 8:30. The talk will go on for about 40 minutes, and there will be questions and answers after the talk. So please plan on staying the whole time, right? Please plan on staying until 8:30. The questions and the answers are often the best part of the event. And I also want to encourage all the undergrads among us who maybe haven't been to a lecture like this. More than anybody, more than other professors, Mr. Brooks is going to want to hear your questions. So you may not be used to asking questions at events, but it's a skill, it's a virtue, and it's something you can learn. So as the talk is unfolding, think about connections that you see to things you've been studying, things you've been thinking about, things you've encountered in your own life. And feel free to agree, certainly feel free to disagree, but we'd like to hear from you. So there'll be questions at the end. So just think about it, and there are no bad questions. There are no bad questions. And the other thing I would ask you is to take a moment and pretend you're on an airplane and you're about to take off. So please turn off any cell phones, put them away. If you're on your laptop, put that away too, because we're about to take off and we're in for an enjoyable evening. So with that, I'm going to introduce our honors director, Dr. Anna Moreland, to introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Tomko. We are just delighted that you all are here with us this evening. This is a really special evening. A lot of people have put a lot of work into bringing David Brooks here to campus, and it's a thrill. So thanks for being here. So last January, David and I were at a meeting where the topic of discussion was moral character in higher education. And at one point in the meeting, David leans over to me and says, "This conversation would be much easier at an institution like yours, an institution like Villanova." Well, that gave me an idea. So by the end of the day, I had mustered up enough courage to say, "David, what would it take to get you to come to Villanova?" "Oh, it'd be easy," he says. "I have family there." David is, after all, a graduate of Radnor High School. I know. So I started emailing. You can imagine, though, that David's a busy guy. Wouldn't you know it, that the morning after Pope Leo was elected, I was able to secure a date for his visit. Now, for those of you who are my age, David Brooks needs absolutely no introduction. We remember with fondness when he and Mark Shields would have civil discussions on the PBS Newshour. We remember feeling convicted by our privilege when we read Bobos in Paradise. We look forward to his regular columns in the New York Times. And some of us still teach his famous essay from The Atlantic, The Organization Kid, that is really truer today than it was 20 years ago when he published it. But to the students here this evening who have turned away from legacy media and toward social media for your news and cultural commentary, let me say this. It is worth paying attention to somebody who has listened so carefully to the cultural, political, economic, and religious divides in this country for decades, and who has emerged as an all too rare voice of wisdom. By the end of this evening, you'll want to purchase his latest book, How to Know a Person, and you will want to read his latest article in The Atlantic. Please join me in giving a warm welcome home to David Brooks.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, and I appreciate the invitation and the persistence. And I'm hoping to become Pope. First Jewish Pope, but Jesus. He was a little Jewish. So I did go to Radnor High School. And when I was a senior, I ran for class president. And I thought I had a good shot until I realized I was running against a young lady named Leanne Massimino. And Leanne was the daughter, some of you, I hope everybody in this room knows who Raleigh Massimino was, or he was the daughter of the Villanova basketball coach. It was actually 2 years before they won the national championship, but he was still a big deal, and I got crushed in that election. But I'm so large-hearted, I have remained a Villanova basketball fan for my entire life. So. And it's been a very good run. Now I'm going to give a talk. I rarely do this, because usually when I give a talk, I've given the talk before, and sometimes 500 times before. But I'm going to give a talk for the first time, and when you do this, you're lost. But because it's the Augustine Center, I wanted to do something a little Augustinian. And so this talk is organized around one of Augustine's insights, which I hope I've got right, which is the belief that we're not primarily reasoning creatures, we're primarily desiring creatures. And I want to talk about desire with you. Now, years ago, I was asked to be the judge of the Boys and Girls Clubs have an award, they give it every year, to the Boy of the Year and the Girl of the Year. And these are students, young people in their teens, who they want to pick out the students who illustrate what the Boys and Girls Clubs can do. And I remember one year, the year I did it, we interviewed a bunch of finalists, and one of the young women had a really horrible upbringing, abuse, just the worst things that could happen. And as she described her upbringing to us, she was weeping. And we didn't know if we could pick her, because the job involves going around the country for a year and telling your story. And we thought it would be traumatic for her to tell this story over and over again. But we ended up choosing her because it was her choice. And the thing that turned me was when we started asking her not about her past, but about her future. And at that moment, her whole carriage changed. Her head was erect. And a big smile spread across her face. And it was the kind of smile that's just not about the mouth. It was a whole body smile. And as she was talking and talking about her future, she didn't know what she wanted to do, but she knew she wanted to make a life that mattered. And I looked in the glow of her eyes, and it was like there were bonfires back there. And it was a gleam. And I have now seen that gleam thousands of times in the faces of young people. I don't know what I'm going to do, but there's some inner enthusiasm. I'm going places. And sometimes it's affluent kids for whom life is a candy store, and they just want to sign up for all the exciting things. Sometimes it's poor kids where they say, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm getting the hell out of here. But that gleam is filled with anticipation. It's not arrogance, it's anticipation about the wonders of this blessings of life. And that anticipation, that boldness reminds me of a story I once read about a little girl in elementary school who was drawing. And the teacher asked her, what are you drawing? And she said, I'm drawing God. And the teacher said to her, well, nobody knows what God looks like. And the little girl replies, well, they will in a minute. I like that kind of audacity. And so I've seen the gleam in the eye of celebrities. I highly recommend reading Viola Davis's memoir, which is a fantastic memoir. And when she was in high school, she was in a drama class. And the teacher said, who here wants to be an actor? Every hand went up. And he said, it's filled with rejection. It's filled with loneliness. There's no money. And hands started going down. And finally, only Viola Davis's hand was still up. And in the memoir, she writes, when you haven't had enough to eat, when your electricity and heat are cut off, you are not afraid when somebody says life is going to be hard. The fear factor was minimized in me. I already knew fear. My dreams were bigger than the fear. That's the gleam. I once saw Lady Gaga give a speech. And as she was talking about her childhood, you could feel that same energy. In the speech, it was in New York, she said, I suppose I didn't know what I would become, but I always wanted to be extremely brave and a constant reminder to the universe of what passion looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like. That's a life oriented around passion, around desire. I hope everyone's seen the musical Hamilton. That is basically the musical rendition of The Gleam. Hamilton was a poor kid from the tropics, and he came here and you just listen to the songs in that musical. I'm not going to throw away my shot. I want to be in the room where it happens. I'm just like my country, young, scrappy, and hungry. Just you wait, just you wait. That's somebody who wants to go somewhere in the world. I've seen it in middle-aged people and in kids. Go to a school play and watch third graders perform. The kids are like trying their heart out, and you look at the parents' faces behind their phones as they're taking video. It says, I care about this. I care intensely about this. I've seen it in the old. My dad lives a couple miles from here in Haverford, and he lives in a senior center called the Quadrangle Club. And I went out to dinner with him once, and I'm seated next to this old guy, 100 years old, who's still alive. I asked him about it today. And he was talking about the 6 books he was in the middle of, the discussion clubs he was in the middle of, the 9 talks he was listening to. That guy at 100 had probably lost passion for a lot of things, like popularity, money, sex. But the passion to learn, that you don't grow out of. You just want to keep learning. And so my worldview, my political worldview, is built around the gleam. How can we create a world in which every child, every young person experiences that anticipation? My personal approach to life is around the gleam. When I was 18 in Wayne, I fell madly in love with a woman named Joanna, the first big love of my life. I remember we were sitting on her couch one day, and because I was already me, I said, what do you want out of life? What's your big desire? And I was hoping she'd say you. But this was about a year before she dumped me. She said, I want contentment. And I looked at her and I thought, not me. And that's fine. Wanting contentment, a tranquil life is perfectly fine. You know, different strokes for different folks. Some people want to live in the here and now and enjoy the tranquility of enjoying the moment. And some people, philosophers, have said the way you enjoy the tranquility of the moment is to renounce your desires. Epictetus. Freedom is secured not by the fulfilling of men's desires, but by the removal of desire. The Stoics believe that, and some Eastern philosophies believe that. And that's fine. But it's not the way I'm wired. And I don't think it's the way a lot of us are wired. We want to be moving. We want a life that's a progressive pilgrimage, the stacking of experience upon experience, developing your capacity, becoming wiser, making a deeper contribution, enduring setbacks, and growing. And I heard at this program a phrase I'd never heard before, the pilgrim virtues. That's the kind of virtues I like. The pilgrim who is making a journey of aspirational discovery. Hegel said, the spirit is never at rest, but always engaged in an ever-progressive moment in giving itself new form. So the way I look at people is based on the gleam. When I meet somebody, I don't really care how smart they are. A lot of people are smart. I don't care how good-looking they are, except for my wife. I want to know what's in their heart. What do they want? Tom Brady was one of the great quarterbacks maybe of all time. And the scouts measured his arm strength. And they measured his foot speed. And dozens of colleges passed on the guy. And dozens of NFL teams passed on the guy. They didn't know he was the kind of person who desired excellence so much that he would be able to sprint faster at age 40 than he could at age 20. They couldn't open up his chest and look at his heart. But he had that. That's his strength. And so I look at all this stuff through the prism. And Augustine, I'm only going to quote him once, but one of my favorite Augustine passages is, give me a man in love. He knows what I mean. Give me one who yearns. Give me one who is hungry. Give me one far away in the desert who is thirsty and sighs for the spring of the eternal country. Give me that sort of man. He knows what I mean. But if I speak to a cold man, he just doesn't know what I'm talking about. And so I've quoted Viola Davis, Lady Gaga, Augustine. These are all high-energy people. I am not. I'm a normal guy. But I learned one thing at Radnor that helped me, even though I'm a man of tremendous equipoise. But I do have these desires. I was a terrible student at Radnor. I was graduated in the bottom half of my high school class because I just couldn't get myself to be interested in what teachers told me I should be interested in. And that was a weakness. But it was the flip side of a strength. When I find something I'm really interested in it, I'm really interested in it. And in life, that turns out to be more valuable, unless you're going to go work for McKinsey. And so my obvious compulsion is writing. I write every day. When I was 7, I went to Paddington the Bear. I discovered Paddington the Bear. And I decided at that moment I wanted to become a writer. And from that early age, I knew writing was what I wanted to do. When I went to Radnor, before I dated Joanna, I tried to date a woman named Bernice. And she didn't want to date me. She dated some other guy. And I was like, what is she thinking? I write way better than that guy. Like, so those are my values. And so since I was 7 until today, including today, there have probably been 200 or 300 days in my entire adult life when I haven't written. I don't like writing. It's hard. It doesn't get easier with age. But I go in there every morning from 7 to 1 p.m. typically, and I write my 1,200 words. And I used to wear a Fitbit, and it would tell me I was napping. But I wasn't napping. I was doing what God put me on this earth to do, and apparently my heart rate went down. And so as I say, I don't like writing, but I want to write. I would hate it if someone took the pain of writing out of my life. It would be kind of an inner death to me. I don't know what I'd do. And that's the sort of gentle compulsion that I have. And I think we all have that gentle compulsion. So this talk is about your love life. And I don't only mean about your love life or mine. I could tell all the breakup stories, but I won't. And I don't only mean about your sex life. Sometimes when we hear desire, we think of sex. Villanova, we'll pass over that. But it's about your desire. The famous psychologist, one of the greats, Gordon Allport, said, motivation is the go of personality. It is therefore our most central problem. One of my philosophy professors, I went to the University of Chicago, which my favorite saying about Chicago, it's a Baptist school where atheist professors teach Jewish students St. Thomas Aquinas. And one of my professors was a guy named Leon Cass. And he said what defines a person is not their intelligence, it's not their identity, it's not their skin color, it's the ruling passion of their soul. Some people are lovers of understanding. Some people are lovers of pleasure. And what you essentially love that's the determining thing about you. It determines where you go and how far you go. So the first argument in my little talk here is that your desires are your most important gift. Augustine was right. You're primarily a desiring creature. Your desires determine what you care about, in which direction you will orient your life, and how far you will go. The other two qualities that are central to our makeup serve the desires. Reason is there to help you figure out how to get your desire. Emotions are there to tell you if you're approaching your goals, which is called happiness, or moving further away, which is called sadness. And so put desire at the center. So the second argument of my little talk is that what you want really matters, and you should want the things that are worth wanting. In 523, there was a Roman senator named, I can't even pronounce his name, Boethius, I guess, who was sentenced to die. And he wrote a very famous book called The Consolations of Philosophy. He said, do you want to pile up large sums of money? Where will you get it if not from those who already have it? You want honors? How will you obtain them except by begging? You want power? You will lie awake at night worrying about your subjects' treachery. Don't want these things, he was saying. 1,500 years later, David Foster Wallace gave a famous address, a commencement address at Kenyon, who I hope a lot of you have read. He made the exact same point. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And it better be God or some other ideal or noble truth, because pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if that's where you tap your real meaning in life, you will never have enough. Worship your body and your sexual allure, you will always feel ugly. So both these guys, separated by 1,500 years and a lot of different worldviews, realize there are imminent desires and there are transcendent desires. The imminent desires are fine. You want a car, you want a nice house, no problem. But if you worship those things, you'll eat yourself up alive. Transcendent desires. Our desires are insatiable because we were created to long for infinite things. And those are things like perfect beauty, perfect justice, respect, wisdom. And if you organize your life around transcendent desires, things will probably go pretty well. The third argument of my little talk is that how you love matters a lot. There's a useful distinction to be made between wanting and loving. If a man wants a woman, he wants to possess her. If a man loves a woman, he wants to adore her and serve her. Wanting proceeds out of a void. You are missing something in your childhood somewhere along the way, and you're trying desperately to fill that void. I used to be a movie critic. This famous movie, it's really old now, it's called Citizen Kane. It's about a man who was ripped from his family and denied the love of his parents. And he spent the rest of his life piling up fame, power, and money in an attempt to fill that void, and of course it ate him up inside. Love proceeds from security, and it takes delight in admiration. I admire this person, I admire this thing, I admire this writer. And that's a fullness, a love from fullness. In his book, The Four Loves, C.S. Lewis describes a woman, he makes this distinction between need love and gift love, which is what I'm trying to describe. And he describes a woman named Mrs. Fidget. And Mrs. Fidget seems like the perfect mother. She spends her whole life serving her family, making sure they have everything they need. But Lewis says there's a lot of self in her love. She wants to see herself as a heroic person. She wants to control the members of her family. She feels resentful they don't admire her enough. She fails at the final and one of the central acts of parenthood, which is letting her children grow up and do their own thing. And so Lewis says of her, Mrs. Fidget's love contains a good deal of hatred. And so you can love out of hatred and desperation and void and want, or you can love out of love. And so how you love things is also really important. The fourth argument of this book is that we as a society has built a lot of systems that destroy our intrinsic desires. 3-year-olds, according to research by a woman named Susan Engel, ask 140 questions an hour. And those of us who have been parents, we've been there through that. Then they go into kindergarten and school, and every teacher I've ever met really loves curiosity, but they have to cover content. And as Vladimir Nabokov said, curiosity is the ultimate form of insubordination. A kid asks a question, it takes the whole class off course. And so the teachers learned to clamp down on that. Susan Engel was observing a class, and it was a class, I don't know, elementary school, and the kids found an old-fashioned scale. And they were playing around, or they were experimenting. And the teacher said to the students, "We can't do experiments now, this is a time for science." And so Engel calculated how many questions are there in a third grade class. It's not 140 an hour, it's 2.3 per hour in the entire classroom. And then by fifth grade, there were 0.48 questions. The students had learned to tamp down your curiosity, and as Engel says, if you lose your curiosity at age 11, it's really hard to get it back afterwards. And so we built these systems. Then the fifth argument I'd like to make is that our society has screwed up our notions of what ability is. We think reason is the crown of the person. We think intelligence is the primary trait of a person. And therefore we create a meritocracy where we sort people by their ability to do well in school and well on standardized tests between the ages of 15 and 22. This is an insane way to sort society. I know a lot of people who have achieved great things. And some of them are smart, and some of them are not. Some of them are creative, and some of them are not. But people who have achieved great things all have one trait in common: determination. They just work really hard. And that's because they're so driven. I used to teach at the Villanova in New Haven, Connecticut. And my I took the train all the way up there because I loved my students. They were wonderful. But sometimes 10 years after graduation, I would have coffee with them. And it was like a light had gone out. When they were around professors asking them big questions, their minds were electric. But then they got in their professional rut, and they were not self-motivated. They were not lifelong learners. They just got into their rut. And when I was feeling ornery, I would tell my succeeding generations of Yale students, 60% of you are going to be more boring at age 30 than you are right now. Don't do that. Be in the other 40%. Because they just didn't have the natural motivation. They were good at jumping through the hoops it takes to get into Yale, but they were not good at leading their own lives. And this is not only true of Yale students. There's a famous experiment, Louis Terman, out of Stanford, took kids in the 0.1% IQ, and he thought he was seeing the next geniuses. He followed them through life, and they did fine. They were doctors and lawyers and professors. There were no geniuses in that study. There were no creative people who changed the world. An air of disappointment fell over that study. Because you pick people by intelligence, you're not picking the most important thing. So the next argument for my book, or for my talk here, is that your passions drive your moral life to an interesting degree. We can be motivated, and we are at different times in our life, by what you could simplistically call the dark passions or the bright passions. The dark passions are the kind of thing that get aroused by demagogues. Anger, hatred, resentment, fear, the urge to dominate, what Augustine called libido dominandi. And demagogues are really good at arousing a sense of anger, resentment. Resentment is about social standing. You're disrespected. And they can get you to do some incredibly ugly things if they arouse the dark passions. But we are deeply broken and vulnerable to these passions. We're also beautifully made. And I think woven into each human being are incredibly noble passions. I think these are almost universal. I've never met a person who didn't have these. The desire for belonging, to be loved by the people around us. The desire to understand the world, to know what's going on. The desire for respect, to be seen and respected and known. The desire to enjoy, to have pleasures. The desire for competence, to get better at things, to exercise agency, to make a difference in the world. And finally, the desire for significance, to have a life that has meaning. And if you can arouse these passions, and we all have a different signature of desires, then you've pointed your life in the right direction. Some people are more relativists. I think the values are whatever we choose, it's all subjective. But I look at these 6 desires for belonging, for respect, for understanding. These strike me as permanently woven into human nature. They are absolute and true. They are universal. They are eternal. They are the sort of things you can bet your life on. And so I'm not a moral relativist. I think they're objectively goods that we pursue. So I'd like to, for the rest, to offer you a little biography of what a passionate life looks like. Just some scenes, just to get a little more concrete. And there's a social ideal, kind of person I look for. And that person is a grower. That person grows every decade of their life. They're different at 80 than they were at 60. They're different at 60 than they were at 40. They're different at 40 than they were at 20. So for example, Tina Turner grew up in Nutbush, Tennessee. And she suffered from dyslexia. She was embarrassed in school. She couldn't really do that stuff. But she did have a voice. And she was at a nightclub one day when she was a teenager, and she was asked to sing at the nightclub, and it turned out a guy named Ike Turner was in the club, and he recognized immediately, this is my $1 million right here. So he took her out and immediately created probably the worst relationship in show business history. He was a slave master. He dominated her. And what everybody knows about it, he beat her remorselessly. And he was a guitarist. He didn't want to hit his hand, so he took those old-fashioned shoehorns, the shoe stretchers, and he beat her on the head with the shoe stretcher. She wrote once, "Sex with Ike had become an expression of hostility, a kind of rape, especially when it began or ended with a beating." And so Tina Turner decided she was going to turn herself into the kind of woman who could stand up to Ike Turner. And this process started with some mundane things. How do you pay the bills? But it also included deep stuff, spiritual journey. And it took her 14 years. That after 14 years, she had turned herself into the kind of person who could stand up to Ike Turner. And one day they were, and there's a poet and essayist, David White, who says, somewhere inside us, there's a child still running enthusiastically toward a horizon it once glimpsed. And when you're in turmoil in your life, if you can go back and find that child within you, then that's your lifeline. And that's what Tina Turner did. And so they were in a limo going to a hotel, and they got in a fight, as they always did, and Ike Turner started screaming at her, "Fuck you, fuck you." And she, for the first time in her life, screamed back at him, "Fuck you." He started punching her. For the first time in her life, she punched him back. That night, he's asleep. She sneaks out. She runs across a highway, nearly gets killed by a truck, goes to a Ramada Inn, begs the manager, "I have no money, I have nothing, can you please put me up for the night?" Which he does. And then at age 38, she begins what most people are ending, a career as a sexy rock star. And from 38 to 70, she has this growing career. She just turned herself into a new person, and it was really hard. But that is growth. All of us hope to become better versions of ourselves as we mature. Tina Turner was able to do it. So they're growers. And such people are actually not rare. And just some famous historical figures. Samuel Johnson. Nobody would know Samuel Johnson, who he was, if he died at age 40. But we now regard him as the greatest essayist in the English language because of what he did between 40 and the end of his life. Dorothy Day. You met Dorothy Day at 25, you do not meet an impressive person. But you meet somebody who may be a saint because of what she did in the rest of her life. And the essence of growers is they just like to be in love with stuff. They like to be in love with callings, with projects, with people. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. They're bad at indifference. And so they are the sort of people who live within their desires. Marcel Proust, novelist, he was dying, he was in agony. And he had written a scene in his great novel, Remembrance of Things Past, a death scene. And he realized he got it wrong. And so he called his sister and he said, "I want you to bring out the manuscript. I got to rewrite that scene." So he's dying and he still wants to get it right. That's a guy who's motivated. Another part of lives like this, and a great trait, is the capacity to be seized. the capacity to have something reach inside you and you feel suddenly, wow, I'm alert, I'm alive to this. When my daughter was 5, she walked into a hockey rink for a birthday party, and she felt immediately at home. She's now 32, and she's a hockey coach in California. She played hockey her whole life. She just felt immediately at home. I call it the annunciation moment, that moment early in life that prefigures what's going to happen. Albert Einstein was 4. His dad handed him a compass. And he looked at invisible forces of the universe moving this needle of the compass. He said, I'm going to study the invisible forces of the universe. He was seized. And that it takes receptivity, a willingness to just be grabbed by something. Then there's the incitement. It's not enough to have desires within. We have to live in a context that offers us opportunity. Abraham Lincoln sort of was ambitious as a kid, but he's stuck on this farm in Kentucky and Illinois. He had no opportunity, but he had a little rowboat, and he was rowing around, and 2 guys came up to him, adults, and they said, would you row us out to the middle of the river? We want to catch a steamboat as it goes by. So he rowed them out, they caught the steamboat, and then as they got on the boat, they each threw a $50 into his boat. And Lincoln wrote later, years later, you may think it a very little thing, but it was the most important incident in my life. I could scarcely credit that I, a poor boy, had earned $1 in less than a day. The world seemed wider and fairer before me. We need our pathways. I met a guy who was in the Navy, and he said, as a kid, I didn't know I could be in the Navy. Of course, intellectually, he knew there was a Navy, and intellectually, he knew somebody must serve in the Navy. But it wasn't until he met a guy who came to his school who was in the Navy that he saw the pathway. And so seen a pathway. Then, a journey of exploration. When you fall in love with something, the first thing you want to do is learn all about it. I have a PhD in my wife. I know so much about her. And I think she didn't marry me for my looks. It's because I really studied her. And I really knew everything about her, and I showed her how much I cared for her by just learning how she reacted to everything. And love and learning get together. And so that ability just to keep learning. My hero here is Warren Buffett. He was a scared little guy. He was not a brave person. He was emotionally immature, but he loved to learn, and he loved to glom onto people who could teach him stuff. When he was a kid, he read a book by a guy named Dale Carnegie about how to do social life. He glommed onto that system. Oh, here's how I can do social life. One of Carnegie's rules is say people's names over and over again. People like to hear their names. I find it a little offensive, but whatever. And then he glommed onto this guy named Ben Graham, who had an investing method. He learned from Ben Graham. Then he glommed onto this guy named Charlie Munger, who taught him to move beyond the Ben Graham method and to study history. Then he glommed onto Katharine Graham, no relation. Katharine Graham was owner of the Washington Post. And this awkward guy from Omaha was suddenly having dinner with Lady Di and Dolly Parton. And he found it thrilling. He said, I learned so much being in this new world. And then he glommed onto Bill Gates. And he learned about tech. And he learned about philanthropy. So the guy, all through life, even up to today, just kept glomming onto people. The next thing that I think happens within passionate lives is what you might call the discrepancy. All wanting flows from a discrepancy. I'm not where I want to be. And the desire to just keep getting better at something. My hero here is Paul Cézanne, the artist. Cézanne knew he wanted to be a painter at 17. His dad said, no, you're going to be a banker. So he served in the bank. He was miserable. He went to Paris, tried to get into the Grande École, rejected. Tried to show his paintings in public, rejected. He was rejected for decade after decade after decade. Nobody would show his work. He decided eventually, I'm not good enough. I'm not going to show my work between the ages of 46 and 56, which should have been his prime, because I'm just not good enough. He grew up with a guy, a famous writer named Émile Zola. And Zola wrote a novel called The Oeuvre. And it was about 2 childhood friends, one of whom grows up to be a famous novelist, and the other who grows up to be a failed painter and commits suicide. And he sends the novel to Cézanne and said, hey, I wrote a novel about us. Cézanne never spoke to him again. things began to turn around when he was 56. And he sold a painting. Then he had a show. And then he became a legend. And at 67, a month before he died, he wrote to a friend, "I want to tell you that as a painter, I'm becoming more and more clairvoyant to nature. But it is always very difficult for me to realize my feelings. I still cannot produce the ability to produce the richness of color that animates nature." So he was still, the month before he died, just still trying, and he painted on the day he died. He just kept getting better and better, the discrepancy. He needed to close that discrepancy. Finally, embracing suffering. One of the good questions to ask if you want to know what you want to do in life is, what pains am I willing to endure? Some people are willing to endure the pain of med school. Some people are willing to endure the pain of Marine boot camp. I read a great book by a Japanese novelist named Haruki Murakami. And he became a novelist, but he was also a marathoner. And as he writes about running marathons, all you hear is how much he hates running marathons. He writes, "As I ran this race, I felt I never wanted to go through that again. At around 23 miles, I start to hate everything. I finally reach the end. Strangely, I have no feeling of accomplishment. The only thing I feel is utter relief that I don't have to run anymore." Like, this guy did not like running. So why do people choose to do things that are hard and unpleasant? Because of who it makes them, who it turns them into. And Murakami said running and writing a novel are similar. You have to have your own criteria for success, and your only job is to be better than you were yesterday. And so he said, if I didn't run marathons, I would not be able to be a writer. And so it's the embrace of suffering. And that's what any craft is like. Finally, let me close the talk with a few more moments, and this is especially directed towards students. Because a lot of you are going to get out of school, and it's going to be a shock. I'll just do this in 5 minutes. I had a student, I had coffee with her a year after she graduated. And she told me, when I was in school, life was station to station. There was always the next test to study for, the next paper to write. Now, she said, there are no stations. I feel like I'm trying to navigate across a vast, unmarked sea. It is a shock to get out of school. I used to bring some graduates from Yale to talk to my classes, and they would talk about bad bosses, breakups, misery. And I could see my current students thinking, well, that was her, it won't be me. But then I was like, no, it's going to be you. And so it's just hard. And there's a lot of fear and anxiety. And so how do you find your passion? How do you find your direction? Well, the first year out of school, one of your jobs is to widen your horizon of risk. Your job is going to suck. But if you can use that year to widen your horizon of risk, you'll walk through life forever after with a wider horizon of risk. I had a friend, she graduated from UVA, and she decided to apply to Teach for America and got rejected. So she Googled Teach Abroad, and some guy from Korea emailed her and said, we need an English teacher in our fishing village. So she told her parents it was a big organized program, lots of supervision, just a guy in a fishing village. So she flies to Seoul, flies to a little airport near the village. It's 11 o'clock at night, there's nobody there to greet her. She speaks no Korean, has no money. She's sitting on a bench outside the airport. There's only one other person left in the airport, a monk. He gets up and leaves. Then they turn out all the lights. And she showed me her journal, what she was keeping, and she was total panic. And then at like 1 a.m, a van pulls up with 5 Korean guys. They say, are you our teacher? She says, yeah. They say, get in the van. Now, if my daughter did this, I would absolutely kill her. But she got in the van, and she had a wonderful 18 months. And forever after, she could say, I did that. And she became an impact investor in Pakistan and across Asia. She's bold. And so my rule, I tell my kids this, 3 adventures a decade. If you can spend your 20s having 3 adventures of disparate kinds, that's a good way to spend your decade. My eldest son is a school teacher now. He served in the military. He worked at a kindergarten in Kibera, which is in Nairobi, and he ran a sports game. And he felt behind, but I said, no, you're doing it right. 3 adventures a decade. And you'll learn what you do want to do, what you don't, and that's just super valuable. second, or whatever number I'm on. My favorite saying, I may have already said this, that all of life is a series of daring explorations from a secure base. And when you're in college, overinvest in your friendships because you're going to need them in your 20s. A buddy of mine, when he was at college, he and his 10 closest friends formed a giving circle. And they decided they would put money in the pot every year for the rest of their lives, and every year they would meet and decide where to give away the money. The purpose was not to give away money. The purpose was to keep their college friendships for the rest of their lives. And those friendships are so valuable to people who knew you when. Then listen to indignation. I have a friend, she's famous, her name is Samantha Power. And she was a sports journalist at this school in New Haven. And she was interning at CBS Sports one summer, and she saw a video of Tiananmen Square. And she saw the tank man. And she was saying, those students in Tiananmen Square are risking their lives for democracy. I'm writing about volleyball. And she was indignant about what happened to those students. And that reoriented her life, so she eventually became somebody who wrote about genocide and became UN ambassador. And so its indignation is sometimes a very powerful force of where your passion is. The final things to be said is that your passion doesn't have to be your job. For most people, it's not their job. It's anything you deeply care about and love. Your calling is no more than, this is important to me, I care about this. And you will find very often it's not your job. But if you live with enthusiasm, and if I could say this, I've talked about all these high energy people, but to me, when I meet somebody who's really living a passionate life, I think Kierkegaard said, happiness is willing one thing, organizing your life about one thing and getting all your desires to merge toward that one thing. T.E. Lawrence was he's famous as Lawrence of Arabia. And he decided he was going to write a memoir. So he did the most ballsy thing it's possible to do. He got the books he admired most and said, I'm going to write a book just as good as these. The Brothers Karamazov. Ballsy. And he sort of did. He wrote a book called The Seven Pillars of Wisdom, which is a wonderful classic. And he said, all men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds find it's all vanity when they wake up. But some dreamers are dreamers of the daytime, and they are dangerous men, for they may act on their dreams with open eyes to make it possible. And this is what I did. So I've tried to reorient how we normally think about human beings to what's in here, or wherever we want to put the desires. They're everywhere. And I've tried to get us to think about this deepest question: what do I really want? And I used to ask my students, I now teach old people in their 60s at Chicago. And I ask these old people, what do you really want? And very often they don't know. They've never asked themselves, what is the deepest desire I have? And sometimes they'll have vague desires. I want to do something creative. I want to help the world. But it's not specific. And so it doesn't go anywhere. But the people who know what they want it well, and want the things worth wanting, those are the people who are just magic to be around. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Raleigh Massimino would be proud, I have to say, after that. So as I foreshadowed at the beginning, we want to open the floor to questions. Mr. Brooks is gracious enough to take some questions. And we have two microphones. Kat and Emmy both have microphones. So please take a moment and think about everything that Mr. Brooks has described and brought before us. Think about how it relates to things you've been thinking about, things about that are coming up in life. And please, we'll open the floor for questions now. So please just raise your hand.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Brooks. So first of all,
You
just
rise, stand up.
stand up.
please.
Okay. Hi. Well, I just want to say, thank you for coming to talk to us today. My name is Sheena. I'm a current freshman here at Villanova, and hearing your speech, I just wanted to think a little bit more about how we have this intrinsic desire to, start new things. And I think the gleam that you talk about, we really feel that when we start new things, a new chapter in our life, a new job. But after a while, I feel like when we actually begin putting in the work for those things, it becomes harder. And I feel like in a sort of way, we start to love them less because it's difficult to have them. So I wanted to ask, how can we train ourselves to endure and continue to pursue those things even amidst like pain or anything like that?
Yeah. Well, there's two kinds of pain. There's pain that Murakami, the runner, described, and then there's boredom. And in any love relationship, whether it's love with a vocation, love with an author, or love with a spouse, there's fire. It feels like fire. And it feels like, what the psychologists call intrusive thinking. Love is not an emotion. It stirs up a lot of emotion, but love is a motivational state. You want this thing. You want this person. You want to play hockey. But sometimes the embers die. And I say this to anybody who's asking me, should I quit? Should I divorce? And my question is always, well, are the embers still alive? If the embers are still alive, if you feel that warmth, then no, you still have a relationship. But if the embers die, there's no shame in quitting things. There's some shame, actually, but sometimes knowing when to quit, sometimes people don't know when to quit, when they should quit. A profession is no longer doing it for them. And so I find a lot of people, they just switch jobs. Just was talking to a lady last night who worked in government, which is not like a big thing for risk takers. But she said she switched jobs every 5 to 10 years. She worked in the CIA, she worked in the finance, she worked in this. And she's just that kind of person who likes to quit and try something new. And I find as a columnist, I'm not a brave guy, but I've kept the same job for 22 years. But I shift my focus every 4 years. I get on new ground. And sometimes I'll meet a scholar and I think, you had that theory 20 years ago. And so I think the ability to quit well is an underappreciated skill. The second thing is, why has the light gone out? A lot of times the light has gone out because extrinsic desires have a tendency to eclipse and destroy intrinsic desires. If you intrinsically love learning, and then suddenly you're in a system where you have to earn good grades, those extrinsic desires tend to crush the natural love of learning. Let me tell one more Yale story. This is my worst day at Yale, and as I say, I had a wonderful time there. It was senior year, and it was the end of spring term. All my students were seniors. And so I asked them, I said, this is your final day in a college classroom. What book have you been assigned here in the last 4 years that changed your life? And there was a long pause, and then one of the students said to me, you have to understand how we read here. We don't read in the intense way that we allow a book to change our life. We just read enough to get through class. And then another student said, yeah, I didn't have a book that changed my life, but I think that I was assigned 4 books that could change my life, and I've set them aside, and I'm going to read them after college. And I said, if you didn't read them in college, I'm not sure you're going to read them after college. But what's sad about that to me was the game of getting through college had replaced the intrinsic desire to be a transformed person. And they were so good at playing the game. But we had crushed their intrinsic desire to read a book that will magically change your life. And that's not universally true. I was at a little school in California called Biola, and I was at the Honors College, and I asked them the same question, and every kid had an answer with an in-depth description of why this book could change their life. And Biola is an evangelical school, but this was Heidegger and Wittgenstein and Nietzsche. This was not like C.S. Lewis. No disrespect to C.S. Lewis. But so sometimes if you can get in a system that's going to make you bored of it, and then get out of that system? Very good question. Thank you. So I hand him.
Hi, my name is Gabe Donovan. I'm a senior here. Again, thank you so much for coming. You mentioned in your second idea that we should be worshiping these things that bring us joy, things like an idea or religion. But what do you think we should do when we start feeling like we're worshiping something else? We're worshiping something else. I mean, like our anxieties or this feeling of an uncontrollability in the world or a fear, and how to either stop worshiping that or break out of that cycle and worship something better than that.
Yeah. Well, I find a lot of students, they are driven by a fear of failure. And frankly, I find a lot of politicians are driven by a fear of failure. Maybe just a lot of humans are driven by a fear of failure. But when I interview congressmen, the thing they fear the most is losing their job. If you want to ask why Republicans are all doing whatever Donald Trump tells them to do, it's because they don't want to lose their job. That would be a failure. And as one of them said to me, a senator, he said, I have 60 people who can do my dry cleaning and make my dental appointments. I don't want to lose that. It's like, really? This is with the nobility of got you into this? But I do think so much of life is a risk-reward calculation. And anxiety causes a lot of shyness. And I think the only thing strong enough to get over it is just being captivated by something so you don't really have a choice. I found I've gotten to my professional life. I found my professional life. I found my marriage. I found a lot of things in my life when I get to a double negative. I can't not do this. I just can't not do this. My wife and I, she more than me, decided we shouldn't get married. She broke up with me 18 times before we were married. But eventually, and so we were parting. Eventually we decided we couldn't marry someone else as long as one of us was out there in the world. So we could not do it. And it doesn't feel like a choice. It just feels like this is what I do. And so I don't know why I'm thinking of this. I'm thinking of Mother Teresa. Maybe it's because I'm at Villanova. And we now know from her diaries that she went decades without feeling God's presence. And yet she didn't quit. And sometimes when you choose something, you just keep choosing it again and again. And the important thing is to choose to do this thing again. Going to church is like that. You don't have to say every day, I'm going to love going to church this Sunday. But if you choose to do it again, what you already did, then you build in this rhythm and you find belonging and membership on the far side. I'm reminded, and this is one point I tried to make at the very end, that sometimes the most passionate people are the most tranquil people because they know where they're going and they know what they were put on earth for. And I once read about an interview Mother Teresa gave to Dan Rather, who was a CBS News broadcaster. And in the interview, Rather asks her, when you pray to God, what do you say to him? And she says, I don't say anything to God, I just listen. And Rather says to her, well, what is God saying to you? And she says, oh, God's not saying anything to me, he's just listening. Oh. And if I have to explain that to you, I can't. And so that's the kind of tranquility. I'll tell one Dorothy Day story. At the end of her life, she was a beautiful writer, and she was asked by Robert Coles, have you thought of writing a late life memoir? She said, yeah, I thought about it. I got a legal pad, and I wrote A Life Remembered by Dorothy Day. And I sat there, and I thought of the Lord, and his visit to us those many centuries ago, and I was just grateful to have had him on my mind all that time. She realized she didn't need to write anything. Just a beautiful tranquility. And she was not a passionless person, believe me. And so the final thing I'd say, and again, this fear and risk, in my view, and I taught a course about this once in college, for those of you in college, over the next 15 years of your life, you're probably going to make 5 life-altering commitments. to a philosophy or faith, to a vocation, to a community, and to some form of family. And the quality of your life depends on how well you choose and then keep these commitments. And a commitment is falling in love with something and then building a structure around it for those moments when love falters. So Jews love their God, but they keep kosher just in case. It's a structure of behavior. We love our spouses, but we have a marriage contract just in case. It's a structure. And my relationship to my job is sort of like a structure. I have the structure of going in and writing every day whether I want to or not. And I have found that as you go through life, the fear of making those commitments becomes overwhelmed when you meet somebody or you meet something that you just can't say no to. And that, well, somebody once wrote, "Perfect love drives out fear." And I think that's literally true. And I find most people end up making those commitments, even though it's scary, because it just seems obvious. I'm going to do one thing for 30 seconds, which I love to do with college students, because all the college students I've ever met really want to talk about the commitment to a vocation, but they don't want to talk about the marriage decision. And there's social science research on this, that the quality of your marriage is like 4 times more powerful than the quality of your career to determine your lifetime fulfillment. So it's really important. And so the little sermon I used to give my students was, first, marriage is a 50-year conversation. Pick someone you want to talk to for the rest of your life. You don't want to be that couple in Applebee's who are in their 70s not talking to each other. Second, love comes and goes, but admiration stays. Pick somebody you admire. And then finally, the Greeks had 3 forms of love. There was eros, which is passion. There was agape, which is selfless love. And there's philia, which is friendship. If all you got is eros, that's a hookup, not a marriage. If it's philia, you got a friendship and not a marriage. You got to have all 3. And it's like when you're confronted with fear, in marriage, like any of these commitments, should be a 90-10 decision. If it's 60-40, that's a warning sign. But if it's 90-10, there's always going to be the 10. But if it's 90-10, you're in.
My name is Patrick, and I'm a freshman here. Thank you so much for your time today. But one of the answers you gave to a previous question just had me wondering, what was a book that changed your life? And do you have any recommendations for students?
There are a bunch of different answers to that question. I mean, Paddington the Bear. I actually went back. I don't know how many of you read this. I haven't seen the movies, but I went back and reread it. It is a sad book. Paddington is like abandoned by his family. He's stuck in a train station somewhere. It's like, what kind of kid was I that this resonated with? I'll say one thing. At college, when I was a freshman, I went to Chicago, and I was a lefty, a socialist and lefty. And I didn't, because it was Chicago, we had a Common Core, I didn't get to choose any of my courses the first 2 years. They were all chosen for me. And that turned out to be the best thing. Once I started choosing my courses, I screwed it up in all sorts of ways. But I was assigned a book by a guy named Edmund Burke called The Reflections on the Revolution in France. And I loathed that book. Because I was a lefty, I wanted revolution. I would go to the library and read about the Russian Revolution. It seemed like the coolest thing. And here was a guy saying, first he said, don't trust your reason. Your reason is not that good. Trust tradition. Go with habits. Go with things that have been around for a long time. They've stood the test of time. And then the core Burkean concept is epistemological modesty. The idea that the world is a really complicated place, and we should be modest about what we can know about it. And so when we do social change, we should do it constantly but incrementally. Burke wrote, we should do social change, we should operate on our communities, on society, the way we would operate on our father in a surgery, with great care and gentleness. And I wrote 3 papers. I remember one was called, well, they weren't all smart back then. It was like, I hated this guy. And then I became a police reporter in Chicago, on the south and west side of Chicago, in the 1980s, when there was a lot of crime. And among other things, I covered a lot of extremely stupid criminals. I covered a guy who did an armed robbery of the McDonald's where he worked. And they were like, "John, we know you. Like, what do you..." But I covered, among the places I covered, were 2 housing projects which have become famous. One called Cabrini Green, and the other called the Robert Taylor Homes. And they were hellholes. And they had been built a couple decades before by sociologists from the University of Chicago with the best of intentions. We're going to tear down these crappy little wooden houses in these crappy neighborhoods, and we're going to put up these high-rise brick buildings. But they didn't ask the people in the neighborhood what they wanted. And when they tore down those crappy little wooden buildings, they tore down all the systems of care that people in the community had built for each other. And so they got to move these high-rises, and within a few years, they were horrible. The gangs took over the elevators, so you couldn't get upstairs without paying some money. And they were crime-ridden. They were just bad. And they've since been torn down. But I'm covering this stuff as Mr. Revolution. And I think, holy crap, that guy Burke was right. This was unintended change. This was people who arrogantly thought they could reorganize society. And they screwed up big time. And so I went back and reread Burke and then a lot of people around of that school, and I became a conservative after many decades of reading. And when I was hired to be a conservative columnist at the New York Times, which is a job I liken to being the chief rabbi at Mecca, and now conservatism in the Trump era has nothing like the conservatism that I grew up with. It's almost the complete opposite. It's not about incrementalism. It's not about humility. It's the complete opposite. But I still call myself a conservative because there is that tradition that starts at Burke, but goes through people like Michael Oakeshott, Irving Kristol, James Burnham. And so that one of the things that I found very wonderful to be part of is to be part of a tradition of thought. And one of the great things Chicago did, and I think you said you were a freshman, one of the things you could do here at Villanova is we tell young people, we give you lots of garbage advice. And one of the bits of garbage advice we give you is come up with your own values, find your own truth. Well, unless your name is Aristotle, you probably can't do that. But you are the lucky inheritors of all these moral traditions. There's Catholicism, there's the Jesuits, there are Augustinians, but there's also the Stoics, there's the Epicureans, there's Jews, there's Buddhists, there's Muslims, there's rationalists. There are all these moral traditions. So don't come up with your own, just find the one that fits. And I found one that fits me. And it was just tremendously valuable to be part of a great conversation about this. And it means it's all organized. And when I found my tradition just by what books did I really want to underline? What had resonated with me? What seemed true? And it's a great way to spend your education, to learning all the different moral ecologies in the world, and then investing in one. So let me tell you about a person who changed my life, just to close this little part out. We were talking about moral formation. And moral formation, I think, is done through exemplars. Dorothy Day or whoever your hero was. See, like, if you're going to fail in life, it shouldn't be because you have an inadequate ideal. Somebody should you really admire. I want to be a little like that person. But moral formation happens from some other things, learning a moral tradition. But I happen to have a person who changed how I do my career, and I think my life. I work on TV. I work on the most. You'd think it would make TV would make me glamorous and emotional, but I work on the PBS Newshour, which is the least glamorous form of TV, and it's the one least filled with good-looking people. And our viewers are also earnest, and they're somewhat seasoned. And so if 93-year-old lady comes up to me in the airport. I know what she's going to say. I don't watch your program, but my mother loves it. But for the first 10 years I worked on the program, I worked for a guy named Jim Lehrer, who co-founded it. And when I said something Lehrer thought was crass and stupid, I could see his mouth turn down with displeasure. And when I said something he thought was smart and worthy of the NewsHour, I could see his eyes crinkle with pleasure. So for 10 years, I just tried to avoid the mouth downturn and chase the eye crinkle. He never said anything to me. And many of our great character teachers never talk about character. But he taught me through those little gestures, this is how we do things here at the NewsHour. These are our standards. And he didn't only teach it to me, he taught it to the whole team. And so Jim has been dead for, 7, 8, 9 years. But the Jim Lehrer moral ecology is still there at the NewsHour. And it's a great thing to leave behind a moral ecology. And that is part of moral formation. My professors, I didn't remember everything they told me, but I just remembered how impressive I thought they were, how learned. And once you've tasted the fine wine, you can't settle for the Kool-Aid anymore. And so that's how a certain book changed me, that's how Jim Lehrer changed me, and that's how a university, a college, my college really changed me. And I'm more aware of that now than I was the day I graduated. So that's the opportunity you have here at Villanova.
Thanks so much, Mr. Brooks. Also, Radnor grad here. I had a question about you. You talked a little about teachers and like how there's this like clamping down of curiosity. How would you like reinstill that in young students, especially for those that have had that fire like put out in them? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a fan of one of the problems with the way we've designed our educational system. It's nothing like life. When you're in school, it's all individual for an individual grade. And you get all these extrinsic rewards, and you get the teacher puts all these hoops in front of you. And so, well, Anna, you're going to hate me for saying this, but I'm going to tell you a true fact. All the professors are about to hate me. There is zero correlation between college and high school grades and life outcomes. Google doesn't ask job applicants what their college grades were because they found it just doesn't matter. And so understanding that the system is storing you in one direction, but it's not really what matters in life. I found that just tremendously useful. And so when the extrinsic rewards crush that out, I found that that can happen in a school. But when you look at the parts of a high school, for example, where there's excitement, the education researchers say it's on the periphery of the school always. I was on the debate team at Radnor. I was on Model UN. Some kids do drama, some do sports. I advise you to do the debate team because I wasn't hurting my cartilage on the debate team. And so I'm in my 60s, I can still run. All my friends who played football, they can't run. But those things on the periphery of school is where the students are motivating themselves. They're usually working in a team, and the teacher is not like some dictator, the teacher is a coach. And that's actually what life is like. Most of life is working in teams. And when they fire people, why do they fire people? It's not because they're not smart enough. In only 11% of cases, it's because they lack technical ability. In 89% of cases, when somebody's fired from a job, it's because they were a bad teammate. They were uncoachable. They loss of social skills. And so what I like about the periphery of school is it's the students autonomously leading themselves in teams. And if it was up to me, if God made me dictator, I would shift a lot of schools, maybe not all of them, to this thing called project-based learning, where the schools organize around not classes, not sitting in rooms, but you have a project, and you do it together as a team. And so, for example, there was a movie I saw about a project-based learning school called High Tech High in San Diego. And the students were asked to research why do civilizations decline? And they not only researched it, they had to build a big wooden gizmo with gears and levers to illustrate all the different causes of why civilizations decline and how they all fit together. And when you see students in the middle of that, they are charged up. And if God made me a dictator, we would have some grades, but mostly you'd graduate with a portfolio of things you did, the projects you did. And then you do something what they call a portfolio defense, which is like a dissertation defense, where the teachers ask you, why'd you make this choice? Why'd you make that choice? And you have to be able to defend yourself. And that's the kind of evaluation that can't be reduced to a SAT score. It's not quantifiable. But the most important parts of humans are not quantifiable. When I taught at Yale, I taught a course in grand strategy, which was Great Strategic Thinkers Through History, Clausewitz, Machiavelli. And for the first term, it was a great books course. It was great. The second term, they had to pretend they were a series of policy advisors, and they were presenting a policy to a president and his cabinet. And we organized us on the faculty, who were playing the president's cabinet. We often had actual cabinet members there. We would always have CIA people there because they're really good at ripping apart a brief. And so my job was trying to make the students cry, like ripping them to shreds. And I always felt bad, but I also was shocked at how much I enjoyed it. But almost universally, they said that was the best experience they had in college, because it was slightly terrifying. They worked in groups, and they had to do something really hard. And they always presented twice. The first times we'd shredded them, and the second times they were really good. And so if God made me, that I would get in these kind of projects that are natural motivators instead of sitting in a classroom. So one over there, one up here.
Hi, Mr. Brooks. My name's Maggie. I'm a sophomore, and you talked about there was 200, 300 days where you didn't write, and I wanted to ask you about the days where you almost didn't write, but you did. What motivated you? Why did you choose to write on those days?
It's a good question. The short answer is I have a deadline. I have to make a living. But that's not the real answer. The real answer is it never occurred to me to not write. It was, our desires are weird. Like, I like shrimp, but I hate scallops. Why is that? Like, you can choose what you want off life's menu, but you can't choose what you want. And so I just do it, and it's like any habit. Once you do it, it's just what you do. And when my wife and I were married, she had these dreams of these great breakfasts we would have where we would talk about big issues and we'd discuss the newspaper. But I really don't talk to a human being until I've written 1,200 words. So she knows not to see me. She knows not to call me or text me in the mornings. The printer is in my office, so she knows not to print. I sound like a really horrible husband, but once you get a habit, you just can't not do it. And I was with a guy who is very fit, and he has a trainer who comes to his house every day between 11 and 1. That's 2 hours of working out every day. I felt like saying to him, how is that a good use of your time? But it's what he does. It's his habit. And so once you get in that habit, it's very disturbing to get out of the habit. And I don't even, some writers say, I don't like writing, but I like having written. I don't really like that. I like it when I'm lost in the process and figuring it out. And I'm going to say one thing, just since we're on the subject of writing, again, this is for the college students, how I write. So I have a bad memory. So what I do is I write things down on Post-it notes. And I research by reading books or articles or whatever, and I print them out. And every column A column is only about 1,000 words. But for every column, I've probably had 200 pages of printed out material and probably 80 to 100 Post-it notes with my thoughts on them. And it's not cheap, because Post-it notes are not cheap. And what I do is I have a rug in my office, and I crawl around on the floor, and I organize all these pages into piles. And each pile is a paragraph in my column or in my book. And so the writing process for me is not typing into a keyboard. It's crawling around on the floor and organizing my piles. And for me, piles are a form of prayer, maybe the closest thing I come to really good prayer. I'm a very bad prayer. I always edit. I want to edit. It's like, oh, this prayer is so redundant. It's so incoherent. Like, you really can do better than this. I'm going to go off on a little tangent. But I was in church one day, and the pastor asked us all to pray for something terrible was happening in Syria. So he said, gather in groups of 5 or 7, and let's pray for the people in Syria. I was like, God, please help the UN General Assembly pass Resolution 947 that will create a no-fly zone. And that, like, I prayed a column, basically. But anyway, to get back to the writing, my point about telling you the story about the piles is that writing is about traffic management. It's about getting things in the right order. And if you don't have it in the right order, you'll just, it's so hard to write if you don't have your structure right. And B, and I see it in my students' papers, they start the paper over here, and then they go off over here, and then they go off over here. So getting the structure right. And so my students don't listen to me, my kids don't listen to me, but by the time you sit at the keyboard, your paper should be 80% done. And if you find your method, everybody has their method. I once went to Faulkner's house in Mississippi, and his method was to write on the walls. And he outlined the whole painting, his whole novel, in the walls, with his writing on the walls. And when he was done a novel, he painted it over and did a new one. So everyone has their method. The piles happen to be my method. But so once I found my method, it feels good to be on the floor, crawling around with my piles. It feels creative. And so that's how I get myself to go to the office every day. It's just, I don't think about it, and I actually I don't enjoy it, but I like it, if that makes sense.
Hi, Mr. Brooks. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Joe Dirienzo. I'm a freshman. I actually remember reading one of your articles for a high school current event a few years ago about President Trump. But my question actually tonight is about a different topic.
Thank God.
Yeah, didn't want to do that to you tonight. The title of tonight's presentation is The Things That Are Truly Worth Wanting. We all want things, that's part of who we are, but those things sometimes seem to be contradictory. How do we decide which one ultimately to choose, or if those two things that are contradictory could ultimately be blended?
A very good question. Well, sometimes it should be said that our desires often conflict. And so as a society, we want equality, but we also want achievement. We want community, but we also want individuality. And here it helps to have grown up in a Jewish home, because Jews are really good at sitting within tensions. And you just got to sit within that tension and make it a creative tension between community and individualism, between achievement and equality. If you ever go to a Jewish school or yeshiva, there are these desks that are shaped like this. And there's one person on either side. And they have a text on the shelf. And they're screaming at each other and arguing about what this line of text means. And the understanding is there is no easy answer to any of this stuff. And so you learn to argue in a yeshiva. You learn to do close textual analysis. But there's no resolving the contradictions of life. And so you try to make those tensions creative tensions. And then, I quoted this Kierkegaard thing earlier, you should try to will one thing. I quoted that, but as I was saying it, I was thinking, I don't really believe in that. I think most of us want a lot of different things. And we want different things in different phases of our life.